Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. It's early morning in the Middle East and the region is on edge after the United States officially entered the Iran-Israel conflict. President Donald Trump confirmed strikes on 3 major Iranian nuclear sites: Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan, describing the operation as a spectacular military success. Trump claimed the targets were, quote, totally obliterated, and warned that any Iranian retaliation would be met with overwhelming force. Iranian officials have confirmed the attacks and vowed never to abandon their nuclear program. A top advisor to Iran's supreme leader has called for missile strikes on US Navy ships. The United Nations has urged calm, while Israel praised the US action. Several Latin American countries have condemned the strikes and called for dialogue. All eyes are now on Tehran as the world waits to see how Iran will respond and whether this marks a turning point in the region or a dangerous escalation. We're now joined by Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, who's a former diplomat. Thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador Dayal, what are your thoughts on the strikes this morning, the action of the US that has been taken? Donald Trump said he would take 2 weeks to make this action. He's made it within the last 48 hours. Successful strikes, he says. What kind of effect do you think this is going to have on the region in the coming weeks?
Well, thanks for having me on your show to discuss this very important topic. You're right in saying that President Trump had said that he would need 2 weeks to make up his mind about entering the war and would be giving Iran enough time to make a deal. But this was perhaps just a ruse to mislead Iran. The US entry into the Israel-Iran war with its nuclear dimension is a huge escalation of the conflict. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command, or the IRGC, has said that it would be striking back and that it is not going to surrender. So there is a danger to the shipping around the Hormuz Straits being affected. And perhaps this would have an impact on the global economy. Now, let me mention that President Donald Trump has doubled down on his warnings to Iran against any retaliation. And he has said in one of his posts on social media that any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Incidentally, the UN Secretary General has said that there is now a growing risk that this conflict would get out of control and that this would have catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region, and the world. So he said that this perilous hour, it is critical to avoid a spiral of chaos. There is no military solution. The only path forward is diplomacy. And frankly, this is what India has always been saying from the beginning. India has said that the way forward should be through diplomacy and dialogue, and that there should not be any escalation. In fact, we have also offered to mediate because both Iran and Israel are our friends. But the problem is who's listening. The spiraling upwards of the conflict seems to be happening. Let me also say that this is also indicative of the way President Trump carries out his foreign policy. President Trump, as you mentioned during your introductory remarks, authorized the dropping of bunker-busting bombs on the 3 most critically important nuclear sites in Iran: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. And he called these strikes a spectacular military success. Of course, the United States has said that the strikes were successful and that all the B-2 bombers and escorting fighter jets have safely returned to their bases. And he has said in an address that Iran must make peace or future attacks will be far greater. So what is the course of events that is likely to unfold? A big question which is being asked is whether there will be a regime change. You know, this can't be ruled out because if the Iranian regime gets more and more battered and it is seen as being weakened, there is a possibility of a regime change taking place. At the same time, if the Iranians attack US military bases in the region, then there could be a big counterattack. And in fact, that would give the United States an excuse to go in an even bigger fashion against Iran. Now, any escalation of this conflict or any widening of the conflict would not be in India's interest, because we have a huge community of about 10 million people who live in the Middle East, and their lives would be dislocated. And we therefore have a great personal interest also in ensuring that this conflict should not be widened. But in any case, we have repeatedly said that it's not the era of war. We have suggested dialogue and diplomacy, and we are hopeful that someone will listen to us. But from the look of things, it doesn't seem that this conflict is going to end so soon.
Ambassador, it seemed that Donald Trump was initially leading with diplomacy, urging Iran to be diplomatic too. However, that tether seems to have run out. What can we expect given the regime that Iran is under right now? What can we expect from their reaction? What kind of military capabilities do Iran still have to utilize against Israel and the United States? And what kind of reaction can we expect from the United States if Iran does strike their military bases in the Middle East region?
Well, the United States has already made it very clear that any retaliation by Iran against the United States, against Israel, or any of the regional countries will be met with force far greater than what has been witnessed till now. So that's a very clear warning to Iran. Now, let me also mention that Iran is considerably weakened. Israel had carried out a very big attack on Israeli military sites in October last year, and the further strikes that have been carried out recently have weakened Iran's military capacity hugely. Then we should also note the fact that Iran's proxies in the region have also suffered a lot of damage, and they are weakened. And I'm referring to Hezbollah, Hamas, and to some extent the Houthis also, although the Houthis do retain some capacity to fight, but they are weakened. So the weakening of Iranian proxies, along with the weakening of Iran's own military capabilities, will certainly make it think twice whether it should go in for any big-scale retaliation against Israel or the United States. But nonetheless, when there is an outbreak of war, everything becomes very uncertain. And the present situation is laced with a lot of uncertainty. And that is why the UN Secretary General has called it a very dangerous situation.
Yes, and Ambassador, we've spoken about the regional implications now. What about going further on than that? Both countries have alliances, both countries have interests in the area. If this conflict does escalate, where does the international community stand?
Well, the international community should try and prevent an escalation of this conflict. But unfortunately, the international community is hugely divided. In this particular conflict, Russia and China have spoken out in favor of Iran. Whether they will intervene militarily, I seriously doubt. Firstly, Russia is involved in its own conflict with Ukraine, and it cannot afford any diversion of resources or any sort of weakening of its ability to strike at Ukraine directly. That's its major focus. Then, as regards China, well, China would give some military assistance to Iran, as would, of course, Russia. But I doubt if the Chinese are planning to get directly involved. Now, as regards all the countries in the region, let's see what their situation is. UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain stand alongside the United States. There are US bases. But there is also a very big US base in Qatar. Qatar has tried to be very neutral between Iran and its adversaries. But I don't think that Qatar is in a position to question the actions of the United States. So the regional countries are unlikely to be able to prevent any escalation, although they will call for such prevention. They will say that there should be peace because of the fact that any widening of the conflict would impact them very adversely. There are US bases in many of these countries, and if those bases are attacked, then the conflict would spread to those countries. So there is then the possibility of US counterstrikes, and therefore the widening of the conflict would take place automatically. So these countries do not want a widening, and they are perhaps going to counsel both Iran and the United States to prevent the escalation and widening of the conflict. Nonetheless, it's a very dangerous situation. Oil supplies are likely to be disrupted. Shipping is going to be adversely affected, and this will have a very adverse impact on the global economy.
Ambassador Dayal, please stay with us. We have some more information coming in. Breaking this hour, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is issuing a sharp warning following US strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. In a series of statements, Araghchi called the attacks outrageous and said they would have everlasting consequences. He accused the United States of violating the UN Charter, international law, and the Non-Proliferation Treaty by targeting what he claimed were peaceful nuclear installations. The foreign minister said Iran reserves all options to defend its sovereignty, its national interest, and its people under the rights guaranteed by the UN Charter. Ambassador Dayal, I just want to get some of your thoughts on that. There's obviously some diplomatic statements in there. Iran's top diplomat saying that Iran reserves all rights to defend itself and its sovereignty, calling the attacks outrageous and has everlasting consequences. Given the language of that, what do you believe Iran's next action could possibly be?
Well, certainly Iran will try to carry out some sort of attacks on US sites, and it will escalate its missile attacks on Israel. But then it will have to face heavy counterattacks, because there is no doubt that Iranian military capability is much less than the combined capability of the United States and Israel. So any escalation will not work to Iran's advantage. Of course, we will hear a lot of statements because the Iranian regime cannot be seen as having capitulated. In fact, it would like to be seen as putting up a fight, and it will put up a fight. There could be covert attacks on some strategic sites, on some civilian sites too, because when war breaks out, nothing is out of bounds. But there could be an escalation in that context, which could adversely affect US interests, Israeli interests, in terms of their civilian population. Let us see how this whole thing shapes out. I don't rule out the possibility of a regime change in Iran, because if the present regime is weakened considerably, then naturally what might happen is that the US and Israel could push the existing regime out and may try to replace it with something else, either a democracy or a military rule, which is in their favor, something which they approve, and a regime which works hand in hand with them. So there is a possibility of a regime change. Nothing is out of bounds. But at the moment, I have grave concerns about how this situation could even impact our immediate neighborhood. Let me mention that Pakistan seems to be getting very closely involved. General Asim Munir of Pakistan nominated President Trump for the Nobel Prize. And if this war expands, reopening of US air bases in Pakistan is just a matter of time. There could be therefore more trouble ahead in our immediate neighborhood. And we don't want to see this conflict as coming more eastward towards us, because that is not at all in our interest.
Ambassador Dayal, thank you very much. Please stay with us. We have some more information. The Israeli military has confirmed that missiles have been launched from Iran towards Israel. According to a witness, interceptions were seen in the sky over Jerusalem and hearing multiple explosions above Tel Aviv. This situation is developing and we will continue to bring you more information once we have it. Ambassador Dayal, I want to come back to you. You did briefly mention the possibility of a regime change. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the armed proxy groups and their possible actions next. The Houthis, who are known to target US ships in the Red Sea, have said now that all US shipping are credible targets now. We've also seen the likes of Hamas come out and condemn the attacks. What are the possibilities of the actions of these groups, which are backed by Iran, the three H's people call them, Hezbollah, Hamas and the Houthis? What are the possible implications that they might have on the region next?
Well, as I said earlier in our discussion, the Hezbollah and Hamas have been weakened considerably. And as you would have noticed, the Hezbollah has not done anything in terms of striking back after Israel's recent strikes on Iran. Hamas has also been quite decimated. Their capacity to hit Israeli targets is very, very negligible now as compared to what it was in October 2023, when the attack on Israel was launched by Hamas, the first terrorist attack. Now, as regards the Houthis, they do retain more capacity to hit targets, and in fact, they are so strategically situated that they can hit American shipping interests and Israeli shipping interests in the territorial seas around them, particularly the straits leading up to the Suez Canal. Other countries could also be affected because these shipping attacks could target them also. So there would be a dislocation of shipping, and therefore it would impact the global economy in a very adverse manner. That route is also used for containers and ships which carry oil-related supplies and equipment. So oil prices could also go up. Now, where do we see this possible role of the Houthis ending? This will end only if the United States carries out a devastating strike on them, and the US is capable of doing that. And in fact, if you ask me, the US is only waiting for an opportunity where it can hit the Houthis also in a very decisive manner, so that they are also weakened. So the possibility of further US strikes in the region to weaken Iran's proxies is very much there.
Yes, and now let's move on to the possibility of a regime change. How possible is a regime change in Iran? We've had a number of guests on. They said that the regime is weak. What does this mean? Weak economically, weak in support. How would one go about toppling a regime? What are some historical examples? We know back when the Gaddafi regime was toppled in Libya, it left a political vacuum and left very serious issues in the region. So what are the possibilities if the Ayatollah is assassinated, if this regime is toppled like Israel wants it to be? What are the possibilities that could unfold?
Well, the Ayatollah has nominated 3 possible successors, and his own son is not amongst them. This is leading to speculation whether Ayatollah Khamenei is planning to leave Iran and find shelter somewhere else because he wants somebody else to take the music, face the music. Now, I served in Iran as deputy to the ambassador in the early 90s, and I found that there was a huge division in Iranian society amongst supporters of the regime and those who were opposed to it. There was this clear division because of the nature of their thinking. There were some who were die-hard supporters. They were very radical in their thinking relating to religious matters. And there were a whole lot of others who were totally opposed, but unfortunately, they didn't have a voice. Now, perhaps, if there is a possibility of a regime change, the United States might help these more moderate elements to find a voice. For instance, on issues like human rights or rights of women, the Iranian regime has been very harsh. In fact, it has been severely criticized, even within Iran, by women for the sort of policies it follows towards them. So there could be elements which would try and help in the possible regime change. So everything is up in the air. Any possibility is likely. By the look of things, any Iranian effort to widen the conflict or to escalate it would work to the detriment of the regime. So if I were the advisor of the regime, I would say, please don't escalate, because any escalation will work to their disadvantage. There is no comparison between Iran's military capabilities and those of the United States and Israel put together. And therefore, the ouster of the current regime becomes a very distinct possibility given its relatively weak strength.
Yes, Ambassador Dayal, please stay with us, because before we take the discussion forward, let us quickly dive into details on the bomb that was used by the United States in order to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. We're learning more about the massive weaponry used in the US strikes on nuclear facilities. Military sources confirm that the Pentagon deployed the GBU-57A/B massive ordnance penetrator, better known as the bunker buster. This 30,000-pound bomb contains 6,000 pounds of explosives and is specifically designed to penetrate deep underground and destroy weapons of mass destruction hidden in heavily fortified facilities. As you can see there, the images of the huge 30,000 pound bomb that was used to penetrate the deeply underground Fordo base. The United States is the only country to have one of these. As we can see, 6,000 pounds of explosives put in this GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator bomb. It's Boeing built and GPS guided and created for the USAF. It has a length of 20.5 feet and a diameter of 31.5 inches. It's, as we've said previously, it's built by Boeing and to reach and destroy adversaries, which helped when Iran's Fordo base was placed about 80 meters underground. As we said, its purpose is to destroy deep, hardened targets, including nuclear facilities, bunkers, and WMD sites. As we've said, it's 6 times heavier than the GBU-28 from the 1991 Gulf War. And it penetrates hundreds of feet into rock or concrete. Precision strikes enabled via the B-2 stealth bomber. Now, the B-2 stealth bomber is a blended flying ring radar absorbing coatings with low IR frequent features that give it radar cross section roughly that of a small bird. So this plane that this huge bomb is dropped out of, it can't be detected by a radar. Well, if it does, it gives roughly the same image of a small bird would on a radar. Okay, so this was the weapon used to penetrate that military base in Iran. This is the first time it's been used in combat. Okay, we're once again joined by Ambassador Dayal, who joins us to discuss this in more detail. Ambassador, the United States used this bomb for the first time in combat. Would you say that this does go to plan, this was a successful use of this weaponry? We've had conflicting reports from the Iranian media to say that the damage wasn't as substantial as America describes it as. Would you call this operation a success if this doesn't escalate into something much further?
Well, I'm not a military expert, so I can't really say about how successful a bomb like this would be in being able to destroy the Fordo sites in entirety. Nonetheless, I have followed media reports and I have come across what the Iranian establishment is saying. And they are saying that the Fordo site has not been damaged beyond just a certain amount, and that the facility is intact inside. God knows what the truth is. I, for one, will be just following whatever news reports come in order to be able to discern the reality of the state of affairs. At the moment, the situation is the Americans are saying that they have completely destroyed Fordo, as also Isfahan and Natanz, while the Iranian side is saying that the damage to Fordo has not been as considerable as is being thought. So let us see what the truth of the matter is. Nonetheless, the fact is that the Americans do have the capacity to strike deep down. These bombs that were used are capable of penetrating very deep sites. So if they have succeeded, it should not come as a surprise, because their success would correlate to their capacity. And there is no doubt that they do have the capacity. Of course, $1 million question is, where do we go from here? Is there going to be any sort of escalation which would very adversely affect the global scenario? Everyone is keeping fingers crossed, and the United Nations Secretary General has also issued a sort of a statement which cautions against any escalation, and he has expressed his fears in this regard. India has consistently opposed any escalation, and we are conscious of the fact that the danger perhaps of an escalation could be coming closer to our own border. Let me mention that in this entire region which surrounds Iran, there are around 40,000 American troops which are stationed, and now they are on high alert. The Houthis have threatened that they would be attacking American ships as also American bases. So let's see what is going to be the extent of the escalation. And there are, of course, possibilities that the United States and Israel may continue to mount these attacks on Iran to prevent it from launching any sort of counterattacks itself.
Ambassador Dayal, thank you very much for your insight. That's all we have time for, but it was a pleasure having you on the programme. We will keep you updated on this developing situation and of course any other breaking news that happens around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.